Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may happen to be in the world, and welcome to No Depletes, Master Your Keystone. My name is Dan, and I'm joined once again by the fantastic Fem and the glorious Faithy. We will move on to the next key. It's Necrotic Wake. Necrotic Wake. Very, very straightforward key, in all honesty, especially with the weapons in mind. We'll quickly go into this first pull. Necrotic Wake is quite similar to Spires of Ascension in that there are a lot of mobs that are repeated throughout the dungeon. The first couple of areas are mostly the same mobs, and then you've got the very last area, or the Necropolis area, which is a little bit different. So looking at this first pull that's being done here, you have the soldiers here, which they don't do a whole lot. They have a leap, and they hit the tank pretty hard, but that's about it. And you have the blight bags that you saw pulled at the very beginning of the dungeon as well. Blight bags, they have exactly the same thing as the soldiers in that they have a leap, but when they die, they leave a disease on everyone in the group. It's effectively bursting, to all intents and purposes, but it's not that deadly, in all honesty. It doesn't do a huge amount of damage. Yeah, it doesn't stack at all. It just refreshes if more than one blight bag dies at the same time. But that's all good. Normally, this pack would, or the idea that Fem wanted was to take the pack of blight bags on the left, the soldiers in front, and this pack that you see just down the stairs with a corpse harvester, a soldier, and a vanguard. That is the standard first pull of Necrotic Wake. It's a pretty sizable pull, but none of the mobs do, or not many of the mobs do anything in particular that makes the pack hard other than tank damage. You have the Vanguard here, which has a stacking enrage, which you can see just on the go back to it so I can see it in just a second. There it is. You have the stacking enrage, which is just here, which it's a standard enrage. It can be soothed. It's just extra damage. You want to be soothing that more or less as often as you can. It does stack infinitely, more or less, I believe. It probably does have a cap at some point.
I think it caps out on 20.
I think it caps out on 20. I mean,
yeah.
You don't want that to happen. No. You don't want that to happen at all. That's going to one-shot your tank on almost any key level.
Yeah.
So do try and make sure that you're soothing that as much as possible if you have a soothe in the group. If not, your tank's going to have to do some running. It also has a meat shield, which is a cast. If you saw our Plaguefall video from last week, it's similar to the horror mobs in there, it's just a channeled cast, which gives the mob a shield over a set amount of time. You're looking confused.
I think you're speaking about the theater mobs.
The theater mobs, which is
we haven't done that.
Which is actually later. So yeah, that's my bad. That's my bad. But it's a meat shield. It is just a shield. It's a channel which makes the shield get bigger and bigger as the channel goes on. You just want to kick that. Kick it as often as quick as you can.
Yeah, it's a cast into a shield. If you kick it in the cast, it doesn't apply the shield at all.
Yeah,
you want to be quick on your fingers when you're gonna see me doing it perfectly here, hopefully.
Bam, yes. There it is. That's how it should be done.
Exactly.
I don't have those kind of reactions, but I'm old. And the last mob that's in these packs is the Corpse Harvester. Corpse Harvesters are pretty nasty as key levels go up. On 15s, they're not too bad. They have a Throw Flesh, which is a random cast. It just throws for physical damage on a random member of the group. And the other cast, which is a kickable one, is Drain Fluid. It's a targeted stun, basically. Just kick that whenever it comes up. It can also be stopped via Incapacitate, Stuns, Fears, etc. You just want to make sure that one doesn't go off as much as possible. But these first few packs, they're not particularly dangerous. It's probably only really the Vanguards that are the particularly dangerous mobs, at least on this key level. You don't normally commit Lust to the first pull, or do you?
We do in high keys, but I don't think you should in a 15 pug.
But you just committed to the first boss. Yeah.
First boss, second boss, third boss, and then that's probably the best Lust.
Alright, not to worry. So the main gimmick of Necrotic Wake are the weapons that are available, and Faithy, do you want to run us through the weapons and we can point them out as we go?
Sure. So the first weapon that we'll actually see is a hammer. Right in the start of the dungeon, on the right side of the dungeon, you'll have a hammer right next to the Corpse Collector. Corpse Harvester. I mean, however, it's quite normal that you actually skip this hammer. However, if you do have a full CC or something that can just feign death, etc., you can go over and you can take the hammer right next to it. So basically how most of these weapons work is just a massive damage output that it does. You have the hammer, which is a single target ability that you get, an extra ability that you can use on one mob that will stun it if it's not a boss and do really, really big damage. Second, we'll have a spear. And we'll have a spear, again, right before the first boss, after you deal with these first few packs, and before you go on to the second pull, if you do the big pull in the start. So if we find the spear real quick, get over there. Oh yeah, and what the spear does is that you will focus you will hit it on one of the mobs, and every mob in between that mob in a line will get hit by the spear. So if you say there's like 10 mobs in a line, if you focus the mobs in the back, all of the mobs will be hit by the spear. And the spear makes the mobs take increased damage, and it's just hits the boss or the mob, depending on where you use it, super, super hard. And it's a really, really good thing to use to clean up packs quickly or kill bosses really, really quickly. And I can imagine that we're using it on the first boss as well, because basically the first boss can become pretty nasty if it lives for a long time. And that is why usually in a 15, you do have a lot of stuff to kill him off very, very quickly, like Spear and Lust and Pride. And you can also play with the Golem, which is the dungeon-specific Covenant, which is the broken Goliath you can see in the background, that if you bring your Covenant ability to, which is the follower, and you talk to him, he will repair the Goliath, and it will drop down some orbs that will do pulsing damage to every mob around you, which there will be a few around dungeons. I think there's 3 in total, right?
Yeah.
So if you do have a Kyrian, they're really, really nice to pick up. Super, super helpful for your dungeon and for the dungeon and for your group. But yeah, Necrotic Wake is quite special with all of these items. In total, as mentioned, we have the hammer, we have the spear, we'll have a orb, which is an AoE pulsing ability that we'll see after the first boss, and lastly, we have a shield. The shield is probably the weakest of the things due to it being a challenging, damaging, reductive channel. Basically, it reduces your damage taken by 50% while it's channeled. The thing being that it is a channeled ability, meaning that you can use ability while it's being used. So you can use it in niche situations probably, and it's probably still pretty good, especially in areas where you take a lot of damage very quickly. Then having that shield can be very, very powerful. But in comparison to the spear, the hammer, and the orb, it does not have the same amount of value, especially in lower keys. But we will see them, and I'm pretty sure Fem does actually pick it up and showcase it.
Yeah.
So we'll see it.
He does. Something to mention about the shield is that while it's being channeled, it's actually a zone around the player who's channeling it, and it's a 50% damage reduction, not just to the player who has the shield, but everyone inside that zone. It would be a fantastic item if it wasn't channeled, because no matter who you put it on, it's going to be bad. You put it on a tank, they can't actively mitigate damage. No shield block, no death striking, no shield of the righteous, no nothing. That is kind of a problem, even with 50% damage reduction. You put it on a healer, they can't heal. There's no throughput going out. You put it on a DPS, they're not doing damage. There's just there's no good individual player who you could actually put that on and actually make good use out of it, at least while it's a channel. Hopefully a day comes when, they remove the channel part of it and maybe just I think it's a channel for 6 seconds at the moment. I can't remember.
It's
8 seconds. So maybe a time comes, for example, if they were to reduce how long it's up, but not make it channeled anymore. Maybe that would be a good way to balance it and make it useful.
It would be really good against prides.
Yeah.
If you didn't have to channel. Like, we've even considered using it on like 25, 26.
Yeah.
As on the 100% pride, because we have no cooldowns going into it.
Yeah.
So like,
absolutely.
It has niche uses, but it's generally just don't pick up the shield.
Yeah, as much as possible. There's really no need to do it. It's at least as it is right now. There's kind of no point. But following on from the Pride, we now move on to the first boss, Blightbone. And Fem, you want to run us through Blightbone real fast? I can see you're picking up some trash with it as well.
Yeah, he doesn't really do much, and we're gonna use the spear. So just pulling trash on top of him is usually fairly simple. But he has a couple of abilities. He has the tank hit crunch, big damage on the tank. Make sure you have mitigation. He also has the main ability, which is the heaving wretch. He targets a player. They get an arrow on their head. He follows that player with that ability. So that player should aim it away from all other players. Generally, you want to be on top of the tank on this fight, all 5 of you, and then the player that gets it moves out. So, and then the 3 ads spawn from that ability, the worms. If these worms melee you, well, they don't melee, but they bite you with a cast. If they do that 5 times, they will blow up and pretty much wipe the group. So, don't get meleeed by them.
Yeah.
And then he has the fetid gas as well, which is just a area denial thing. The worms drop those when they die as well. So you wanna ideally kill all the worms stacked on top of each other, which can be achieved with grip, AoE grip from Vengeance, Ursul's Vortex and knockbacks and stuff.
Yeah, something that's worth pointing out about those fetid gas zones is that the circle that goes down on the floor initially, it doesn't actually do anything on its own. You can still be inside that circle when it goes off. It's just an indicator to show what zone it is that the pool that comes afterwards is going to affect. The pool on the ground, I can't remember if it actually does damage on its own. I believe it does.
It does slightly, but it's mostly that it silences you.
Yeah, it's a complete silence, and it's an incapacitate as well. So even as a melee, you still don't want to stand in it as all. Just stop you from doing anything at all. But you don't have to rush to get out of the circle itself before it actually goes off. Also worth mentioning, it grows out from the middle, so it's not like it drops it on the entire zone where it was pointing, where it was, forecasting where it was going to be immediately. Here you can see the Goliath in use. As Faithy mentioned, it was the Kyrian specific, or the Kyrian specific Covenant feature of the dungeon is probably the best way to put it. And they just drop these little orbs here, which, as mentioned, pulsing damage and pulsing healing for your group. It is very nice to have all 5 of these up at the same time. It does actually result in quite a lot of damage. I've had pulls where entire prides have been carried by one Goliath because the orbs are just that strong. Again, as mentioned before, moving forward, a lot of these mobs are just repeated now. You can see over on the right-hand side here, this little gatekeeper. Don't pull it. Just don't pull it. It's not good. It has a lot of HP, it takes a long time to kill, it does a lot of group-wide damage, and it has a dot which can be dispelled, but I believe it still jumps when it's dispelled. I believe it's a stacked debuff which loses stacks as it starts timing down. You can dispel it to get it off of one player. Yes, I knew it. Brilliant. But like I say, it does more damage while it's on the same player. So dispelling it doesn't get rid of it at all. It just jumps it to another player until it actually disappears on its own. It's really not worth pulling. It's not that much count. It's an incredibly annoying mob to play. There's no need to play them. That's all. It's just avoid them at all costs. At all costs.
They also summon patchwork soldiers, which do not give count. And they stay when he dies. So.
And they melee the tank incredibly hard for no reason, but all the same. Yeah. You move on to the second area. You can see the second Goliath, which has just died off to the side of the screen there. And now you've got these 2 mobs in front of us. Faithy, do you want to run us through this little area here?
Okay, so up next, we're getting a Sorcerer, we're getting a Bone Flayer, and we're getting a Necromancer. So first of all, we have the Sorcerer, which has some interrupts that you just like to interrupt as much as possible. However, it is important to mention that if you do play this with the Necromancer, which is pretty important as well, there will be more interrupts. How you usually deal with Necromancers is that they have a mob called Mage, and this Mage casts a Frostbolt Volley, which can be very lethal to your group. It does a lot of damage. So what you prefer doing is that you just want to CC this mage and then just not play it entirely. You'll just leave it be. That is due to when the Necromancer dies, all the mobs around him will immediately explode and die. This explosion does not do damage to you, it's just the mobs dying, basically. So as we see, we're playing the Nick Sorcerer and we're playing the Bone Flayer. The Bone Flayer giving a tanky buff, which can be a bit annoying, was it HP reduction? I think it was, I reckon. That is dodgeable.
Yeah.
However, here you can see Fem, he just plays the mage. So what do you want to do if you do have the mage in and you don't have a full CC or just the CC in general for the mage, is that you just want to keep it interrupted. It is more important to interrupt the mage than the necromancer itself. If you do have interrupts and coordination enough to be able to interrupt all of it, then that's fine. After some time, necromancer will start summoning more mobs, which is basically one set of additional mobs, which is 2 warriors, a crossbowman, and another mage. Usually you are able to kill the necromancer before these mobs pops up, but if they do pop up and you do have them spawn, then again, another mage. Keep it CC'd, keep it interrupted, and when it dies, everything else will die around it.
Yeah, exactly. There is no point in AoEing those, as was mentioned. The animated mobs heal ridiculously fast.
But my overall,
if I'm in a key with any of you and I see you dropping flame strikes or earthquakes and things like that on these mobs, I'm not going to be happy. It's say again, sorry.
Isn't earthquake single target now?
It depends on legendary.
Oh, okay.
It depends on legendary, but it's just there's just no point. It's pad. It is pure pad, and there is no need to do it. You can kind of get away with it if there are other mobs in that same pack with the necromancer that do need to be AoE'd down, I guess. But if there's not, and you're facing the necromancer alone, don't do it. It's a complete waste of time, and it will actually make the whole pack just die slower. We have the Bone Mender in here as well. Again, there's a lot of repeated mobs from here. The Bone Mender is very straightforward. It does just have a heal cast that needs to be interrupted. There is also a final bargain cast, which will full heal any mob that it gets the cast off on, but that mob will then proceed to lose HP very rapidly until it dies. You can kind of make a judgment call about whether you want to stun that one or not. It can't be kicked by any normal methods with a kick or a pummel or what have you. It would have to be stunned. But it is up to you whether you want to let that go through or not. I know there have been times where I have just let it go through, because then you can just safely ignore the mob that's just been healed to full HP. It is going to die off on its own eventually anyway. There's no huge issue with that one. You'll see that Fem just looked to skip past this mini boss mob here, as well as pick up the orb. He's got the orb on his head right now, so you can see that the first orb comes just in between these two packs that were just played. This mini boss is particularly nasty.
Skip it.
Skip it, yeah. Just skip it. Shroud, Invis pots. You will very rarely find any group that's actually playing this mob. If you were to play this mob, just quickly, the mini-boss itself, it has a Necrotic Bolt cast that needs to be kicked. It has another ability which drops orbs on the ground that pop after a certain amount of time and do a lot of damage. And it also has a shield that it puts on itself, which can be purged or dispelled by almost any means. But it's completely unnecessary to play that pack. Just try and skip it as much as possible. Again, lots
as we
of
said last week.
Yeah,
like bring Invis potions to any keys.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
By keeping, you can keep just a stack of Invis potions in your bag.
Yeah.
It's one slot in your backpack, but 20 invisibility potions will probably be good enough to see you through potentially an entire week of keys, maybe if you're not doing that many of them. They are pretty cheap, and it's just good to be prepared. We mentioned that last week. We mentioned that last week as well. You can see the Goliath, which just got pointed out just after these two Marauders here. I'll just let this run a bit so I can point that one out again. You will find that quite a few groups may want to play the mobs or the Necromancer on that side there just to take that Goliath, but it's not overly necessary to do. You can quite safely skip the pack if you want, but if you did want to get the Goliath, that's where it is right there. But from here on, again, lots of repeated mobs. There's maybe one more mob type in here, which are the Shuffling Corpses, but we'll get to those in just a moment. We are about to see Fem pick up the shield, so we'll get to see him show that one off in just a moment. In terms of items in the dungeon, there are 3 hammers, 3 spears, 2 shields, and 2 orbs, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, and again, you're just looking to avoid as many shields as possible. It used to be the case that rogues with the Master Assassin Legendary were able to grab these items and abuse the extra crit chance that they got for more damage, but that's no longer the case. It does still scale with crit chance, it just doesn't scale from the crit chance with that Legendary anymore. So normally what you'll find is a group going into a Necrotic Wake will check between all of the DPS who has the most crit going in, and whoever has the most crit going in is usually the person that's designated to pick up these items and use them as they go through the dungeon, in particular the orbs. Things like the hammer... Yeah?
Yeah, it does not scale with combustion. Do not try to combust weapon.
Yeah.
Combustion only increases the crit chance of your fire spells. So
it does not work with Outlaw Legendary either anymore. They have fixed that. So all the Outlaw gameplay that you have seen, it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
And basically, all crit buffs that most classes have been changed, so they're X class specific now.
Yeah.
So unless your class or your ability says that you get X amount of crit, then it won't work for it. And I'm pretty sure there is no class right now that has any crit buff. That is just pure crit and not class specific.
The only things that it will scale with in terms of in terms of, I suppose, it's not linked to a class, but the Karain Soulbind as a Night Fae that grants you 25% crit going into a pack or into a pull, that will scale with it, as well as any trinkets that give you crit on use. For example, there's a strength trinket in the other side which gives you crit on use. That would scale with it as well. But not by any class-related means does it scale with anymore. These are the Shuffling Corpses that I was talking about just before. The only other mob type between here and the next area after the second boss. They don't do much. They walk very slowly. They slap your tank. And
they melee hard.
They melee hard. So you can opt to kite them. To be fair, even if a DPS was to pull them, they can probably kill them off on their own. They do move slow enough that it doesn't matter if they have aggro. A mage could take them out easily enough with a combustion, no problem at all. But again, they're the only other mob type that you'll find going up towards the second boss. But we do have the second boss coming up. I can't remember if you played the Necromancer or not. I don't think you did, right? Or did you?
We did.
Okay.
Yeah, instead of the Goliath one.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Not have to skip again.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah, so again, another Necromancer pack, but we already know how this works. But then we move on to a Marth the Harvester, which, Fem, do you want to run us through that one?
Well, yeah, sure. It has a couple of abilities, mostly Necrotic Bolt. It spams Necrotic Bolt, just kick it as much as you can. However, do save kicks for when it spawns the ads. There's going to be 2 warriors, 2 mages, and 1 crossbowman that the boss occasionally spawns. Also, quick, the other orb is over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There it is.
I'm so good at showcasing these things. So
I love it.
Yeah. So you want to kick the boss. When it spawns the ads, you want to kick the mages. If you have CC, such as Shackle, Trap, Paralyze, stuff like that, you can choose to CC 1 mage or 2 mages if you can. But generally, people do 1 mage and then they kick the other mage. But we didn't. So you just want to kill them all. If the boss does Final Harvest and any of these ads are alive, the ads blow up and do group-wide damage. I think you could probably live it on a 15.
Probably.
But generally, just kill them before the cast. Also, if the mobs are alive when this happens, these green circles on the ground will follow the mobs. So, like, they're attached to the mobs, not to the ground. So make sure you are aware of that. After the Final Harvest, the boss goes into a frenzy and it gets 5 stacks. So, well, depending on how many ads been killed, it gets stacks that does pulsing AoE damage that your healer has to deal with. That's just, heal forehead.
Yeah.
And then it has a breath, which it turns to a player and starts breathing and rotates either left or right. Avoid that, because if you get hit by it, you get a nasty heal absorb, and your healer is already struggling on this fight because it does a lot of damage.
Yeah.
So make sure you dodge the breath and kick as much as possible.
Yeah. exactly. It is a relatively straightforward boss. It is just a little bit intense. To be fair, the majority of dungeon bosses are very straightforward. It's just whether how intense they are is the major difference between them. And this one is definitely on the harder end, particularly for healers. But as long as groups are actually kicking the boss enough, then it can be substantially easier to deal with. But yeah, it is a particularly difficult boss. That's normally where you will use your second spear. Will normally be on that boss, along with your usually second bloodlust. But it is particularly difficult. Again, anything to make that boss easier. But then we fly up with the help of angels to the ziggurat to fight the next area. All the count that you need is now in this next area. How much % do you need to have before you go up, Fem?
68%.
There you go. So as long as you have a route that is around 68% before you go up, everything else that you need will be up in this area. You cannot avoid any of the trash.
Yeah, but please do 68%. Just make an effort to get 68%. If you get too little, you will not get your pride. That's fine. Not getting the 100% pride is fine for the third boss. However, you will probably not kill the boss in time.
Yeah.
But that's fine. But overcounting over 68% is really bad, because you will then get your 100% pride during the gauntlet mobs, and those automatically aggro you when they spawn. So just make sure you don't overcount.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have like a leeway of 0.8% or something.
It is very specific, but yeah, I mean, it's, you know, if you wanted to, again, all of these videos will be put up on YouTube. Hello, YouTube. So if you want to actually have a look at the route itself, this route was done pretty perfectly by Fem. It's a very, very good route that he's done here, and it will be enough for you to get that 100% pride with no other trash and in time for the third boss. So you'll always have this as a frame of reference where needed. It's outstanding. So coming up into the last area, there are a lot of repeated mobs, such as the soldiers. There's a lot of repeated mobs here with those. The corpse, I believe these ones are corpse collectors, or are they corpse harvesters? I need to double check, unless Fem knows. They are collectors. No problem. Okay, so the corpse collectors are basically the same as the corpse harvesters, but they do have one additional cast, which is an incredibly nasty group-wide disease, which hits incredibly hard, as well as the drain fluid that it had from earlier. You do want to kick both of them, but if you are going to let one go through at all, probably let the drain fluid go through. Don't let the disease go through. I cannot remember what that one is called. I used to know it. Gore splatter. That's the one. Gore splatter. So again, if you are going to unfortunately have any of them go through, make sure that it's the drain fluid and not the gore splatter. Gore splatter will easily delete your group in a heartbeat. The only other mob, there's 3 other mob types up here to note. One of them is the Flashcrafter, which you can see right now. It was just really well shown off here. So something that you'll see happen here, the creation that's next to the one that's marked with the skull is going to be CC'd by the druid. It's rooted there. And now you have the Flashcrafter, who's currently casting Throw Cleaver. Throw Cleaver is targeted on a random member of the group. Anyone but the tank, I believe. And it's exactly as it says on the tin, right? It's just going to throw a cleaver between the mob and whoever it's got targeted, but anything and anyone can block it, including the pride. So if you have a look, unfortunately Fem took that one because he got trolled a little bit, but it does mean that you'll find that a lot of groups will use these Flashcrafters to kill off a lot of the trash that's upstairs, in particular the pride, just to make it a lot easier. It means you can hold back on some of your cooldowns so you can use them for the packs going forward. But that's mostly what they're used for. They do also have a Fleshcraft cast, which is a heal on a close-by undead mob. If there is no close-by undead mob, they will start using it on themselves and healing themselves instead. It can be kicked and therefore should be kicked. But if you look at the creation's HP right there, for example, so there's a throw cleaver going through. Creation gets chunked for about 20% of its HP. It does hit very hard and is very useful for cleaning up a lot of the trash here. While we have the creation here, a couple of very simple mechanics. It is mostly a tank slapper. It has a Bone Claw cast, which is just a tank ability, as well as a Crush, which is an AoE stomp, which does a lot of damage. You just don't want to stand in it. You can stop that with stuns or with a disorient, and it won't recast. So if you are lazy as a melee and don't want to move out, just stun it or gouge it as a rogue, for example, or blind it, and you can just stand in there and won't have to worry about it recasting. The final mob to talk about, which I want you to go into, Fem, is the stitch works. I believe there's one more still in this room that you're yet to pull in the far right, but do you want to run us through this stitch work here? Because it is a particularly deadly mob for tanks.
Yes, indeed it is. It's the hardest hitting mob in this dungeon for tanks, but you don't really notice it as a non-tank. It has two abilities. First of all, it melees hard, but that's not what's going to kill you. The Tenderize is what's going to stack up on you, and it's stacking, increasing damage taken, physical damage taken. And then he also has a cast called Mutilate. So when you pair these two together, Mutilate is the hard-hitting physical ability. So once you start gaining some stacks of Tenderize, you are very likely to either need to, run to reset your Tenderize stacks, or, call for an external, use something big. It probably won't matter much on 15 or lower, because you will most likely kill it before it starts mattering. But do watch out anytime you are above like 2 or 3 stacks of Tenderize, you will take a lot of damage from Mutilate. Also use trees.
Yes. Yeah, things like that are incredibly good. Earth elementals, trees, anything to just alleviate at least a little bit of pressure from your tank. Whatever it is doesn't have to tank for long. It's just enough time for the stacks to be able to reset, which is, again, it's not that long. You could even realistically move away from the mob and have someone taunt it and have the tank taunt back if absolutely necessary and in a panic. But it probably won't need to come to that, just if you are able to kill it off quickly, or if you have something else like trees to be able to fill in that gap. Once
every tank can reset it by themselves just running.
By running like mad.
That obviously spreads out the mobs, and that's not good for damage.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly. It is very annoying as a melee DPS when your tank has to go on a run. But to be fair, it is important that they survive. So it can easily wipe the group if the tank was to die there, because it takes them quite a bit of time to get back up if you don't have a combat res ready. But all the same, once all of the trash that was initially in this room is finished, you now move on to a gauntlet, which Fem alluded to just a little bit earlier. When the gauntlet starts with these two Stitchwork assistants here, there is no stopping him. You will automatically get into combat with every pack that spawns from here, which is the two Stitchwork assistants. There's a pack on the front left with a form of Akirian Stitchwork plus some soldiers, and there's another one on the front right with another type of Stitchwork and some more soldiers, which also again hit the tank pretty hard. Faithy, do you want to run through the types of mobs in the gauntlet for us, including the two Stitchworks?
So we're going to start with the Stitchworks assistants, which are going to spawn at the first mobs of the gauntlet. Both of them will have the same projectile as the Crafter, which will hit or focus the target, and it will hit the target no matter if it's friendly or enemy. So what you'd like to do is that you'd like to go behind the other mob, right? If you do get both of them, which is likely, then you'd like to go behind one of them, and then you let your tank soak the last one of them. Lastly, one of the Stitchwork assistants will fixate a random player and run after the target. If it hits you, it's almost lethal. It's almost a one-shot. So if you get fixated, start running. It will slap you very, very hard. And lastly, you'll have the other assistant casting an interruptibility ability, just like the earlier mobs. So you just interrupt that, and then the assistants will be dealt with. Pretty straightforward. Just try to utilize the projectile as much as possible to kill them off, as they will die way quicker. As Dan said, it's just about 20% of a mob's HP. So by using it, it will just go way quicker, and you won't get hit by it, which also does a lot of damage, and your tank won't have to take unnecessary damage by soaking all of them. Next, we have a Gore Crime, which is pretty similar to all of the previous Flashcrafts we've seen, the big mobs. The difference being that it has a frontal now, that it will focus in at a random player or random direction, and it will cast Gut Slice. and you can move out of this frontal. It casts it pretty quickly, but you'd like to get out of it ASAP, as it does pretty big damage and leaves a bleed on you. So it's basically just unnecessary, avoidable damage. So when you cast it, get out. If you're ranged, just stay a little bit further away and you won't get hit by it. Once again, melee or range privilege.
Yep.
But with that, the mob will go down. It does cast Tenderize as well, as Fem talked about before. So do try to reset stacks if possible. And yeah, Mutilate, which is basically just a big hit with a lot of Tenderize stacks that just hits a little bit harder. Well, a lot harder. But yeah, the only difference being the bleed frontal that you'd like to dodge. And then after you deal with that, the next and last set of mobs will spawn, which has the Rot Spore, which is basically like the gas bags that we'll come into later on Theater of Pain. So basically what they have is a aura that all around them will do damage passively to everyone around them. He will not be casting Tenderize, like any of the other ones. So for the tank himself, it's a lot more friendly. It does, however, still cast Mutilate, and it's still melee pretty quick, hard. So do respect it, anywho. And lastly, he will focus a random target, and he will spit on them, and it will leave a pool on the ground, as you can see. Basically, yeah, just get out of it, kind of idea. Not a lot to do about it. It hurts a lot. So if it is focused on you, do feel free to use the defensive. And just get out of the pool ASAP. When you do kill off Rotspot, you would like to take him as far away from the middle as possible, away from the boss, as his corpse itself will still emit the aura and do AoE damage around him. So take the mob away. You don't want to kill it directly where you're going to play the boss. As you can see, Fem takes it to the entry of the room, and then he won't have to deal with the corpse being there at all, and the aura won't really have any effect. And that is the goal.
Good job, Fem.
Thank you.
Something else to mention about Rot Spew. The zone on the floor and the aura that Rot Spew has, they are the same debuff. But that means that if you are next to the mob, you are able to stand in the zone on the floor and you won't take any additional damage. They are exactly the same ability, basically. So if you are at range, then yes, move out of it. If you're in melee, your tank doesn't have to move immediately. You don't have to move immediately. You're going to be taking the same damage regardless because you're right next to the mob. The only thing that will hit you hard is the initial impact, which is the most deadly part of that ability anyway. But you don't have to rush to get out, you know? Basically, if you're a tank, don't panic to get out of it, and then turn around and put your back to the mob to try and run away and get mutilated in the back is what I'm saying. That would be not good in the slightest. But with that out of the way, again, as you can see, the 100% pride was just in time for Surgeon Stitchflesh, because from here, we now go from boss 3 to boss 4. We're on boss 3 right now, but there's no trash between here and the last boss. Surgeon Stitchflesh. Quite an interesting boss, really. I kind of like the way that it works with the creation as well. The creation itself is just like the Kyrian Stitch works from this room initially. They have a Mutilate cast. They don't have Tenderize, though I believe it is just Mutilate. Is that right? And they have a stacking buff on themselves, which means they deal more damage the longer that they're alive. So as the fight goes on, they do hit harder and harder as they go. They also have this Meat Hook ability. Meat Hook is how you are able to damage the boss. So you can see initially, the boss is up on the ledge just behind the Stitch work itself. You can see him just up here. And he will be casting Stitch Needle as well as dropping pools on the floor, which do deal an incredible amount of damage. Stitch Needle is just a dot that's applied to a random player. Just needs to be healed through. That doesn't hit particularly hard. The pool is deadly though. So the idea is you want to look at getting the creation to use Meat Hook towards you, but have the Meat Hook go into the boss. So you can see the mage just blinked over to the right area. Meat Hook goes off towards the boss itself, and it drags him down. From here, you want to pop Bloodlust and as many cooldowns as possible, and maybe consider using your third spear into Surgeon Stitchflesh, because at this point, you're on a timer until he jumps back up again. I believe you'll be able to see it in a moment. Where are your bars, Fem? Oh, there they are. Perfect. I see them.
Yeah.
Excellent. So you can see the escape timer just down here. They've got 12 seconds in which to bring this boss below 5% HP. If it's below 5% HP, it will no longer jump back on the platform. Yes, that's not a huge amount of health, but that will be more impactful if you do plan on pushing higher and higher keys. That means you've got a timer not just to kill the boss, but 95%, which is basically dead. But you know, it's for all intents and purposes, you are on a timer all the same. I believe you one phase this in this group.
No.
You don't one phase it. Perfect. So what you can see, when the escape goes off, he will just jump back up, and the idea is that you just need to pull him down again. If this first creation is still alive, he will meet hook a second time as the boss is jumping back up. You can pre-position that hook towards the platform so that it'll just be pulled straight back down. You can see on the boss right now an ability called Morbid Fixation, same as the two mobs that were at the very start of the gauntlet, the one that did the fixate. It's exactly the same ability. There is also a meat hook that goes off at the same time, however, so as long as you're far enough away from Surgeon Stitchflesh that you don't get meleeed instantly, then the meat hook will go, as long as it's facing the boss, it will go into the boss and interrupt the Morbid Fixation, so whoever it is that's being targeted doesn't actually need to run at least all that much. If it does catch you for whatever reason, you are probably dead. He has a Sever Flesh ability, which is, it just trucks. It's an absolute nightmare. But you'll see here, Surgeon Stitchflesh jumps back up, again, not quite below 5% HP, but when he does jump back up, he'll immediately spawn another creation to come and help him in the fight, and again, it's exactly the same idea. So they'll fight the creation for a little bit. It has the Mutilate ability. He's going to target the meat hook on a player. They're going to stand in between the creation and the boss, move out of the way when the initial cast has gone off, bring the boss down, and just finish him off. This is why it's important to not pop all of your cooldowns or put too much damage into the creation at the very start of the fight. I see too many people making that mistake. All you really need to do is build resources on the creation if you are a class that needs to build resources, or bring back cooldowns. You have just fought a Pride, so for example, if you're a mage who used Combust on a Pride, by all means, fight the creation to bring back Combust so that it's up in time for the boss. Same thing for Recklessness for a warrior with anger management, and any other class that has that kind of mechanic inside of their kit. But I believe that's everything for Surgeon Stitchflesh. If there's anything that you two want to chime in at all?
No, that's about it. Really.
Perfect. In that case, we move on.
We could say, if the Stitchflesh stays alive for not long enough time, the third hook, even though the boss is still down, you would like to pre-position it so the hook will hit where Flashcrafter will jump up. Because as the hook goes out, the boss will jump back up onto the platform and he will immediately be taken down. So if possible, you'd actually like to keep the first Flashcraft alive for the entirety of the fight almost. So pre-position the hook, the third hook, to the platform where the boss was initially, and he'll be grabbed down. And then, the boss will just be instantly down, which is super neat, basically. And then you can kill off the Flashcraft as a new one will be coming running in. But it should be at low HP by then.
Yeah, if you don't one-phase him, then looking to two-phase him is absolutely ideal. Two-phasing him is almost preferable, because it means that you'll have your cooldowns guaranteed, more or less, to be back for the next boss, Nalthor the Rhymebinder. Faithy, do you want to run us through Nalthor?
Yeah, so he's an annoying boss for melee, I think. Well, not necessarily melee, for DPS players in general. So he has a few abilities. They're not actually that bad. Like, there's not that many abilities, that difficult abilities. First of all, we have Frozen Binds. Frozen Binds basically just focuses a player that's not the tank, and it's a despellable ability you'd like to despell. However, everyone inside of that circle will get hit as well if you despell them before they've moved out. So make sure that you've moved out of the circle and then despell it as fast as possible. As you can see, the healer doing here in the start. Secondly, there's Ice Shot, which is just a tank hitting ability, which does a lot of damage. You should think it's magical, but I'm actually quite sure it's physical, right?
The Frostbolt?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the Ice Shot. So it is actually physical, so do take that into consideration if you're a tank. Secondly, we have the shield. The boss will just throw a shield on himself, which is called Aegis, which is basically just a pulsing AoE. While the shield is active. So the faster you kill the shield, basically, the quicker the pulsing AoE will go off. So yeah, just get rid of the shield. Not that you have to save cooldowns or anything for it, but the faster you get rid of it, the easier it is for healer. And lastly, you have Comet Stone. Oh, well, not lastly, but next you have Comet Stone, which is an ability where circles will spawn under you constantly, very quickly all the time. So what you'd like to do in this mechanic is that you want to be on the run, basically all the time. The way to do this, if you're ranged, is just don't hit each other, just run around. However, if you're melee, there is a rule as per se, as you'll stack up preferably on tank or stack up on someone else, and you will go clockwise together. So you're basically going around the boss. You don't have any downtime, but always go clockwise, preferably. And that's basically how you deal with that. If you do want to play it safe as melee, you can just run out of melee as well. But if you want to get your uptime, you can see as Fem does, just go clockwise. If there was another person, you just stand on him and you walk together. And then lastly, we have Exile, which is basically a one-person intermission where he will focus one target and he will exile you, basically. What it will do is that he will take you below to the side of the necropolis, while you have to run by the end of those sides, where there will be a mob waiting for you. And by the time you kill the mob, I don't know if we probably can't see them too much. Maybe you can see the outline of the area down there. It's basically, there'll be a lot of swirlies, dodge them, and get to the other side, kill off the mob. It has an interruptible ability you'd like to interrupt, but it has very low HP. It's not that you need to save major cooldowns or anything for it. However, it is a good idea to kill it as fast as possible. Actually, when you do come up, you'll have a debuff that when it runs out, it will leave a zone on the ground. It is the ice fields that you can see around the platform. So what you'd like to do when you get up is that you have a few seconds where you could hit the boss in theory. If you're melee, just quickly scout out, found a corner, and then drop that in the corner. So basically when the duration of the debuff goes out, then it will spawn the pool. And you'd not like to spawn that under the boss or near other players. So usually it's just take it to a corner. And that is basically Necrotic Wake, right?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, something about the Dark Exile. It's probably the one thing that comes to mind that is a lot easier to do as a melee than it is as a ranged. The zones that appear on the floor, admittedly from a tank point of view, we can't show it off properly, but if you catch any of us streaming this key as a DPS, you might see it. But the zones that spawn on the floor, there's no safe zone for it. It won't necessarily follow you, but it has a chance to fall on top of you no matter where you are on the platform. So you can be fighting the mob and it will happen. So as a caster, it's a little bit more difficult than it is as a melee. As a warrior, I'm used to killing that mob pretty quickly, coming back up with 3 or so stacks of the debuff and then continuing with the fight, but some casters will struggle to get many successful casts off on that mob, and they could be coming back up with 7, 8 stacks of the debuff, so the zone that they drop will be absolutely massive. It's definitely the one saving grace of being a melee so far in Shadowlands dungeons, not that there are many of them, to be fair. But all the same, that is it for Necrotic Wake. Overall, possibly one of the easiest keys on in the dungeon pool in Shadowlands as it is right now. Weapons just make this so easy, even without the old rogue abuse with Master Assassin Legendary. It's incredibly straightforward. You know, the weapons just carry so much. The Goliaths, if you have a Kyrian, they carry a lot of it as well. Yeah, you can skip a sizable amount of the trash. Everything that you end up pulling, at least on this route that was done here, is all really straightforward to deal with. Most difficult things are probably the Kyrian stitch works inside the necropolis, as well as maybe the necromancers, if you don't handle them properly. But outside of that, very straightforward key. Certainly nothing particularly deadly as you look to go through that one. I think if you are looking for a particularly easy weekly key to do, consider doing Necrotic Wake fairly often, week by week, as long as along with Mists of Turner Scythe and Halls of Atonement. They're probably the 3 easier keys that you can look to do in Shadowlands right now. Fem, anything to add?
No, I just think weapon management is the most important thing in this dungeon.
Yeah.
Use a spear on first, second, and third boss, and you should be fine.
Yeah. In terms of the hammers, there's no real rule about where to use them. You might see a lot of groups, especially when it comes to higher keys, maybe they'll look to hold a hammer for an emergency situation, maybe throw one out on a pride if it's looking to be a little bit spicy. But other than that, you'll generally see that a lot of hammers are maybe held until the last boss, because something to note is that the 100% crit when you come up from Dark Exile on the last boss, that does count towards weapon usage as well. So if you have a hammer on the last boss, you can come back up, throw the hammer at the boss with 100% crit, it's going to do a ton of damage. It'll certainly break a shield for free, which, especially as you push higher keys, does become more and more important. But for a 15, just throw it out and do big damn.